And I remember the first time I printed my novel, standing at the printer, and 3 pages of abnormal psychology, 5 pages of logic, 6 pages of metaphysics and epistemology, 400 pages of everything is illuminated. And my peers looked at the computer and looked at me and looked at each other and were like, what the hell is going on here?
Thank you for being here. My name is Gregory McCormick, and I am the new manager here at for the Cultural Programming Department at the Toronto Reference Library, overseeing the A-List and the Black Heritage Month and the Indigenous celebrations in June, and of course the Appel Salon, all of which you are all here to see tonight, our very first fall 2016 event. We're very, very happy to have you all. So I've had Jonathan Safranfour's new book, Here I Am, on my office desk for a few weeks, and before I started reading it, that title, Here I Am, such a powerful, evocative title. And when I started reading it, I could sort of see why that title is such a key part. It's a cry of identity, it's a cry of saying, I'm here. And I think that is one of the really beautiful things about his novel, is this struggle of identity, which is something that all of us are looking at and considering today in our modern world with all of the changes that it's going through. So I think that Jonathan's book is one that I think all of us will really appreciate as we are finding ourselves in this world where we're bombarded with information, bombarded with what it means to be to live today and to have so many multiple identities. I first discovered Jonathan Safranfour's book, Eating Animals, which I thought was such a fantastic book, particularly because he takes such a strong stand, but it's not parochial. It's not a parochial stand, and I think for us, we're so lucky and so fortunate that we have a writer like Jonathan here tonight. So let's all welcome him to the stage.
I don't know, do we need the water based on what's on in front of us? It tells you what kind of a night this is going to be. Thank you. You're showing your good side, I take it? Jonathan was telling me backstage he had to sit in this chair because if he was here, this would be his evil side. Do you want to tell the audience a little bit about that?
I will tell it from my good side. I did a science fair project when I was in, I think, 2nd grade or 3rd grade, back when everything was very definitive, and you could have a hypothesis and prove it and put it to rest forever. And my hypothesis was that people had a good side and an evil side. And I didn't mean it in some sort of ethical or philosophical or intellectual or moral sense, but just simply their faces had a good side and an evil side. And then what I did was I took photographs of people, mostly, as it turned out, the women's gymnastics team from the 1988 Olympics, who I was just utterly obsessed with. I used to sleep with pictures of them under my pillow, it's true. And I would cover up half of their face and ask people, do you think this is their good side or their evil side? And 90% of people were in agreement about that's the good side, that's the evil side. So it was just a lesson I learned early on, and now I try, as a sensitive person in the world, only to look at people's good sides.
Well, I'm glad the audience is going to get your good side. This is my evil side, so I apologize in advance. Actually, before we get into this, I wanted to thank everybody for coming out. This is a fantastic crowd. I think this room fits over 500 people, and it's filled, to as far as I can see. And, there's a lot going on in the city this weekend. Obviously, the opening weekend of TIFF, and the Blue Jays are playing Boston today. Go Jays. And I was walking down King Street. King Street's one of Toronto's main thoroughfares and where the film festival is taking place. And I passed the Princess of Wales Theatre on the way here, and there's more people here than were waiting outside the theater. So you are officially more popular than Ewan McGregor. So there you go. And actually, it's funny because Ewan McGregor is here directing American Pastoral, which is another movie about a family in crisis, by Philip Roth, who also wrote Operation Shylock, which is a book that has been compared to Here I Am in some of the early reviews. So I thought that was an interesting coincidence. Not to dwell on TIFF too much, but it struck me just the other day that the first movie I ever saw at the film festival was in 2005. It was Liv Schreiber's adaptation of Everything is Illuminated. Were you here for that? And what do you remember about the circumstances around the release of that movie?
Well, first I will issue my own thank yous. Thank you for coming. It's technically been 11 years since I released my last novel. It's been about 5 or 6 years since Eating Animals came out. There are a lot of ways of marking time. Everybody knows that. And this has been a kind of lumpy passage of time. Sometimes the years passed very quickly, and sometimes the days were interminable. But it feels like it's been long enough since I talked about a novel of mine that I have forgotten the previous experiences, and that I'm doing it for the first time. And the kind of amazement that anybody would care is something I really couldn't overstate. And I don't mean that in a silly way, and I don't mean it in a self-congratulatory way. I mean it in the sense of why is it that people care about books, and why is it that people care about books that are, at least in the case of this one, culturally hyper-specific, and probably not specific in a way that corresponds to the experiences of most of the people in the room. So I hope it's something we'll get to talk about in the course of the conversation, just what it is that happens and why it is that, I think it's a little bit easier to explain why people line up to see a blockbuster movie than why they would fill a room to talk about a book about a Jewish family in Washington, D.C. in 2016. So we can talk about that. I also want to thank you for hosting this. We had a conversation when I was in Milan a week ago. My book came out in Italy before it came out in the States, and I came back to my room and I was really quite tired and a slightly grumpy mood, and I knew I had to do this phone call, and if I remember correctly, we'd even rescheduled it maybe once or twice.
We might have, yeah, we pushed it forward.
And he was supposed to call at whatever it was, 8 o'clock, 8:05. Okay, he hasn't called, something's wrong. Call on my cell phone, hey Jonathan, it's Mark, I'm trying to find you, what's going on? I said, I don't know, just call the hotel and ask for me. Okay, I'll try again. Sit around for another 5 minutes, get another call on my cell phone. Hey, listen, I called the hotel, like they're not recognizing your name or something, I don't know what to do. Meanwhile, my cell phone is like $20 a minute because I don't have any kind of plan because I like to think of myself as a Luddite, even though I might not be. But in any case, I said, I'm in room 128, just call and ask for room 128. 5 minutes pass, he calls back, there is no 128. Do you mean there is no 128 among the numbers? Do you mean there is no 128 among the rooms in the hotel? He said, there's no 128 among the rooms in the hotel. I said, I'm absolutely sure I am in room 128. I happened to be in my boxers at the time. I was like ready to put on Narcos or whatever the hell it was on Netflix and just doze off. Okay, fine, I put on a t-shirt, went to the door, opened the door, 128. Big bronze Italian letters. Came back, I'm in room 128. Room 128 exists. You have to figure this out. And I said, what hotel are you calling? And that was when we realized the problem you were calling.
Yeah, in my defense, I had been given the wrong number. There was, it was broken telephone somewhere along the ways. But also, I mean, the silver lining in this, I talked to Francesco, who was the receptionist of the wrong hotel, so many times that afternoon that I have a friend in Milan next time I go there. So, it worked out for both of us.
If it had been France and not Italy, you would have an enemy in France.
Yeah. I felt so bad for him. I mean, he's here I am being like, you're wrong. You have this guest, berating him. I'm the ugly North American who doesn't speak Italian. He was so kind. So it worked out.
It really worked out, though, because we had a lovely conversation. And in fact, it was about 5 minutes into the conversation that I thought, I'm really grateful to be having this conversation now. I'm grateful that I'm such a lucky writer that my book goes into the world and people want to talk about it and ask questions about it and even more contribute meaning to it. And that's really the most magical thing about publishing a book. When I wrote the book, I should say, first of all, when I wrote the book, I wrote it not really from a position of trying to create meaning or present arguments or make a case for anything. There was no voice that I had found that I wanted to share. There were no characters like brimming with life inside of me that I wanted to put out into the world. I really begin with nothing. And in the process of writing, I try to suppress a lot of kinds of intentions. Rather than exercise them, I try to suppress them so that it can be a process that is born out of intuitions and reflexes and lots of sort of subconscious stuff. And it's only when I start to edit the book, which is quite far into the process of writing it, and then ultimately publish the book, that I consider what it is that I wrote. Writing is not about considering meaning, it's about forcing something on the inside to the outside, and then when you're a published writer, which is a completely different identity, you consider meaning. And one of the wonderful things about being a published writer is watching how the book becomes a vessel for meaning. It's not as if I had ideas and I'm hoping people will agree with me or see what I meant. I actually don't really know what I meant, by and large. I know that I was trying to authentically express something about my imagination or my experience or my concerns, my hopes, my fears, but I don't know what it means. And I've had this situation so many times now that it shouldn't surprise me, but it still does every time when somebody's speaking to me about a book in the context of an interview or just a friendly conversation will say, "It was so interesting how you had Jacob do the thing here because he was weak because of this." And I will say, "That never occurred to me."
Have you always worked that way, or has your approach to writing changed, from 2002 to now?
I've always worked that way. And in part because I didn't, my dream was not to be a writer. It seems to me that the writers I know sort of fall into two camps. Those who always knew they wanted to write, they were voracious readers, they kept diaries, some of them went to writing school, they could not imagine any other future. And writers like me who sort of maybe came to it through the back door or were interested in a certain kind of expressiveness or creation, and books were the best approximation of it, or the best vehicle for it. So I was thinking just the other day about when I wrote my first book. I wrote the first draft of my first book when I was in college. Mm-hmm. And this was back in 1997, believe it or not. And we didn't have email access in our rooms. I was right on the cusp of when people started to use email in that different way. But we had computer labs in the basement. I sometimes wonder what happened to all those rooms that were computer labs. But you would go to the computer lab, which was this dank, windowless, horrible place, to check your email once a day, maybe once every other day. It's a little bit maybe like somebody who lives in the country and has like a 3-mile-long driveway, who goes to the mailbox and opens it and takes it back. And you would go down there to check your email, and you would also go down there to print things, mm-hmm. because we didn't have printers in our rooms at that point. I guess they were too expensive or too rare. And so you'd go, and the way it would work is you would send your file into a queue. And you'd say, okay, this person is going to do their abnormal psychology paper, this person's going to do her astrophysics paper, this guy's going to do his comparative literature paper, and I will wait my turn, and then I will print my thing. And I remember the first time I printed my novel, standing at the printer, and 3 pages of abnormal psychology, 5 pages of logic, 6 pages of metaphysics and epistemology, 400 pages of everything is illuminated. And my peers looked at the computer and looked at me and looked at each other and were like, what the hell is going on here? And who is this person? And I was one of those people. I was like, what the hell is going on here? And who is this person? Because I did not remember exactly writing 400 pages, and I didn't exactly intend to write 400 pages. At that point in my life, and I think a lot of young people experience this in different versions, like I was a nice big boulder, but there was a good steep incline. And just like the energy wanted to come out, and things wanted to happen, and things that are so effortful now were so effortless then. But I established certain habits, in terms of how I wrote and how I thought about writing and what my ambitions were, which were not to finish a book, but to be open to the book that wanted to be finished. People often ask me why did it take you 11 years, to finish Here I Am? It didn't really take me 11 years. It took me like 3 years, 2 years even. And I think it might have even been the quickest writing process I've had. It just took me a long time to get to the beginning of it. Because unlike my first book, where the incline was very steep and downhill, or my second book, which was sort of relying on some of the inertia from that first book's experience, maybe it was level, maybe it was a little bit sloped downhill. Now it was like uphill and greased and very difficult I could not rely on something just happening. It had to be an act of really extreme will.
That reminds me of another interview you gave recently. You described Here I Am to another journalist as, and I quote, my first book. Why do you feel that way? And does that mean you look back at everything as illuminated and extremely loud and incredibly close as, your apprenticeship or an education of some sort?
I think I said it in the same spirit that someone who has a child late in life, has children, and then later in life has a child, either because of a second marriage or because of an accident or whatever. When more than 7 years, let's say, separates children, or 9 years, I think that parent is aware in a way that they weren't before. When you have a child, your first child, your second child, you're just so embedded in the experience that it's hard to actually be present for the experience. You're trying so hard simply to make it through, to do the right thing, not to kill your kid, or not to die in the process yourself, that you're just kind of grateful for the end of the day. I don't mean that in a silly way. Like, I remember what it was like. I remember what it was like to count the seconds until my kids would fall asleep, and then I would start counting the seconds until they woke up. And then you get older and you have more knowledge and experience and maturity and the powers of reflection, and you're able to witness yourself living instead of just living. And I'm jealous of people who have children later in life, because they get to know, sort of, in effect, know then what they know now, And so with this book, I felt a little bit like I got to know then what I know now. And when I reached the end of it, this is not any kind of statement about the quality of the book. I don't really care about the quality of the book, odd as that might sound. I was so gratified to have reached the end of it, because I had so much appreciation for what was required to write it, which is to care about something at a very high level for a very long time. And as I was saying to a group earlier, that statement applies to anything in life that matters, whether it's like parenting or a marriage or a relationship or your job, whatever your job happens to be. Harder than the task itself is maintaining a high degree of care over a long period of time. So there are other ways of writing books, and I have friends who write books in those ways, and I don't judge them, and I'm often jealous of them, who will, I'm going to write a book about car racing, I'm going to write a historical novel, I'm going to write a romance because I've never done that before, I'm going to write a book that takes place on Mars because I've never done that before, and my ambition as a writer is to try to write lots of different things. I just don't write like that, and I can't write like that. For whatever reason, I have this internal voice telling me, this is the last book you're going to write, so try to fit everything into it. I had this amazing experience when I was in Milan. It actually happened the day I spoke to you. I can't remember if we talked about it or not. I had really wanted to see The Last Supper. I had wanted to see it for a long time. And I had a busy schedule in Milan. But there's a little window, and I said to my publisher, could we go see it? And he said, well, you have to get tickets and make a reservation. It's not the easiest thing in the world to do, but you're an American author, and your book is very successful, so I'm quite sure I'll be able to get you into it. So I got very chuffed. I was very excited. I FaceTimed with my kids. I was like, guess who's going to see The Last Supper? Guess who's going to butt in line to see The Last Supper? What's The Last Supper? Oh, it's this Da Vinci. Who's Da Vinci? Oh, he's this painting. It's Jesus Christ. So what? Well, it's like a Passover Seder, sort of. Well, we don't even want to go to our own Seder, so. All right. Anyway, your dad got to the front of the line, so you can tell your friends about it. Then my publisher, obviously, came back to me and said, what I thought was easy is not so easy, but we can get you into La Pietà. I said, that's great. I've wanted to see that my entire life as well. Well, not that La Pietà. You're thinking of the one that's in the Vatican. This is the one that's in Milan. Okay, so I got to go see it. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's Michelangelo's last sculpture, and it's the only sculpture he made that wasn't commissioned, that he made for himself. There's a beautiful gallery, a wonderful setting, and you walk in facing the back of the sculpture so that you really have to like confront it on your own terms. Among the many things that are unusual and amazing about the sculpture, that there are 2 figures but 5 arms. One of the arms is just sort of off to the side, and it is because Michelangelo, presumably, originally conceived of 3 figures or 4 figures. And I asked the docent, why didn't he just get rid of the other arm? And she said, well, because the sculpture has a center of gravity that depends on that arm, and if he were to get rid of it, it would topple. In art history terms, that's called a regret. In a sculpture, that's a regret. And then, as we were about to leave, she said, I think unaware of the echo, you know, one of the last things Michelangelo ever wrote was, my life's greatest regret was that I worked so much on my art and so little on my life. So Here I Am is a book that is filled with that first kind of regret, even though it wasn't necessary, because you can edit a novel. The center of gravity won't topple if you remove something. It's filled with those kinds of like extravagances and just gratuitous kind of writing and redundancies and just muchness, because it's the way that I like it, primarily, and because it reflects something that feels authentic to me about life. The second kind of regret of working on one's art and working on one's life, I did not feel with this book for the first time in my life. It's not to say that the book was autobiographical or therapeutic or cathartic, because it really was not. But I took it personally, and I felt a closeness to it that I hadn't felt with my previous books. And that's, I think, the real sense in which I felt like it was my first book.
Well, let's get into the novel. You've described having various points of origin. There's just not one genesis when it comes to Here I Am. And one of them was a TV show that you were developing for HBO called All Talk. Since we're never going to probably have a chance to see the show, can you tell us a little bit about it and how it ties into what you produced?
So I wrote that for about 2.5 years. I got a phone call from Scott Rudin, who is a producer.
He did Extremely Loud,
He did
right?
Extremely Loud. And I'd always admired him from a distance. He has wonderful taste. He makes great work in a world in which it's more and more difficult to make great work. And he said, would you like to adapt this book that I own the rights to? And I said, no. There's a lot I'm unsure of, but I'm sure I don't want to adapt anybody else's work. Fine, we got off the phone, everything's nice, peace reigned. And then he called me back and he said, well, what if you were to write something original? And at this point, there was not a novel that I cared about to that extent. And so I felt lost. But I also wanted to continue to feel productive as a writer, and I trusted him and his taste. So I said, let's try it, sure, why not? And I started to write something, and it just happened very, very quickly that it came together. And I ended up being in his office for maybe 3 hours every single day for about 2 years. He is like one of 5 people I've ever met who I would consider a genius, a true genius.
What makes him a genius? Or what's genius to you is a more interesting question, I think.
It is an interesting question. I regret that I opened it up. Well, I'll tell you the answer I was going to give, which my therapist would encourage because it was the answer I was going to give before I thought about it. What I was going to say is he knows where things should be. He just knows where things ought to be. And that implies, though, that it's somehow objective, which it isn't, but it also kind of is. Like, we like to think of taste as being subjective, and yet certain things stand the test of time. It's not to say that they're universally loved or that things are universally reviled. There is a kind of taste that a consensus forms behind over time. And I think it has to do with things being in the places that they want to be, whatever that means. I don't know that I can describe it any better than that, but that sounds right to me. And he has a very good sense of where things ought to be. And so we worked on the show for about 2.5 years, and it was just a great pleasure. It was a joy, and I really loved working on it. And it encouraged me to think about writing in all kinds of different ways, maybe most importantly, an emphasis on dialogue and an emphasis on a certain pacing of drama, I think both of which are revealed in Here I Am. Then the show just like started to get momentum behind it from HBO, and we cast the show, and we were ready to start shooting, and it occurred to me that, in fact, creating a TV show is not simply writing a TV show, it's being on set and dealing with actors and making the whole thing work, and there's a system that wasn't going to be for me. It was not, I didn't want that to be my life. I enjoyed the writing process, but I didn't want that to be my life. And very much to HBO's credit, they only want to make things with people who want it to be their life. That's a good way to do it. It's a good strategy. So we had a little problem, but it wasn't a huge problem. I just decided that I would go back to writing novels. Although it didn't feel like I was going back, it felt like I was going to for the first time in my life. Because that first book I saw come out of the printer and I was surprised by the pages. The second book was, in a way, it was a continuation of the first book. But this time I chose, I'm going to be a novelist. This is what I'm going to do with my life. So the show had some similarities to the book, but more differences. The biggest similarity was that one of the inciting events in the show was a discovered cell phone, in which a wife learns of an affair that a husband's been having.
You said something interesting, I thought, when you said when Scott called you up that one time, you felt lost as a writer. When you're not working on a book, do you feel generally lost? I mean, is writing what grounds you?
As a person or as a writer?
Both.
So first of all, just the distinction between person and writer is funny and weird.
Why?
I'm surprised how often I make it. I'll sometimes say, like, I feel excited as a person, but kind of dejected as a writer. As if, what is the writer, a robot? I mean, the writer is the person as well. It's just a component of the person. When I feel lost, I should say that writing hasn't been, until recently, and I don't know if it will continue to, I don't know what the future will hold. Until recently, it was not my primary identity. And it wasn't even my, secondary identity. It was, I used to sort of, I was very casual about it. If someone asked me, when did you decide you wanted to be a writer, I would often say, well, it's something I would just sort of decide every day. Who knows what the future will hold, as I just said. Now I take it a little bit more seriously as an identity. I don't think it was until I finished this book that I felt an extreme longing to write a book. I didn't feel that in the 11 years between Extremely Loud and this. I would feel kind of lost. I would feel a professional obligation to do something, as everybody feels. I would feel a kind of thinness or shallowness in my identity. But I didn't long to do it for a positive reason. I just wanted to kind of compensate for a negative feeling. Whereas now, having finished this book, it feels generative, and I want to do it.
Mm-hmm. And I think we should point out, too, it's not as if, during the last 11 years, you were sitting on your couch watching football. You produced Eating Animals, you edited the new American Haggadah with Nathan Englander, you worked on the HBO show, you became a father, you released Tree of Codes, kind of the art project slash book. How do you think those projects filtered into Here I Am, if at all?
I don't think they filtered in at all. I think that I was glad to have done those projects, and I'm proud of them. And Eating Animals I am as proud of as I am of any of my novels. But to be honest, I would not have written them if I had been immersed in a novel that I cared about to the necessary extent. I would have preferred to be writing a novel. It's not to diminish them. It's not to say they were filling time or something like that. I really am great. I feel so glad that I did each of those projects, each in a different way. But I think novelist is the most ambitious identity for me. It's the one that I most badly want to fulfill. It also happens to be the most difficult. So nothing would surprise me less than having a hard time with it in the future.
Going back to the novel, another point of origin is your idea, you wanted to write about an earthquake in the Middle East. And you even went to Israel and spent some time at the, I think it was Geophysical Institute outside Tel Aviv. Where did that idea come from, and what did you, tell us about your time at the Institute and how that influenced what you eventually wrote.
If I knew where ideas came from, I would be there and not in Toronto. Unless Toronto is where ideas come from. I don't know where ideas come from. I had an experience the other day with my 7-year-old where we often play games, word games, rhyming games, trivia games. I just like to play games all the time, word games. And we were playing trivia. And it was at breakfast. And I said, can you name for me 5 dinosaurs? And he's like, Dad, of course I can name 5 dinosaurs. Of course I can. Tyrannosaurus Rex, T-Rex, Tyrannosaurus, Rex,
That's smart.
I said, well, so technically those are the same dinosaur. Which was an upsetting thing to hear. And then he said, can I ask you a question? I said, sure. He said, did you ask me that because there's a dinosaur on the back of my t-shirt? I said, is there really? He said, yeah, of course. And it was breakfast, and I guess I hadn't seen his back yet. And the front of the t-shirt was very plain. There was nothing to tip off that was that t-shirt. And I said, no. And then I said, well, no, but of course. Of course. There could not be another explanation. Of course. Of course I saw something that I wasn't aware of having seen, and it influenced the way that I interacted with you. So there are things that one is aware of seeing and hearing and feeling and thinking, and you can go a pretty long way, like writing about those things. There are also all of the things that you're not aware of seeing and hearing and thinking and feeling. I think you can go a further way with those. At the very least, you can go a deeper way. And that's the kind of writing that I'm most interested in. So when you ask me where an idea came from, if it's an idea that I'm proud of, I probably wouldn't have an answer. Other than to say, I guess it was somewhere in my periphery. It was on the back of the world's t-shirt somehow. I don't know exactly how. So somehow that idea got into my head. For whatever inexplicable reason, it kind of tickled me in a vaguely pleasant way. And so a lot of being a writer is just pursuing those. It's like scratching those itches, because one has a choice. Like an analogy that I often think about is when you get into bed at the end of the day, at the end of let's say a long day, at the end of a long week, and your apartment or house is cold and your bed is nice and warm, and you're just about to doze off, that moment before that feeling of the elevator dropping that everybody knows, and you'll have some little tiny thought. You think, well, I could get out of this nice warm bed, go back into the coldness of the room, find a pen, find a piece of paper, and write that idea down. Or I could assume that I will remember it in the morning, which no human being in the history of humankind ever has. Or assume it just wasn't that important to begin with. So being a writer is making the effort to pursue ideas because you believe they might possibly have some significance or meaning. So in fact, most of them don't. They just don't. That's life. That's the way the brain works. Most of it is just disposable. But every now and then something, the effort was proven worthwhile. So the earthquake was not unique in that period as an idea that I pursued. It was just an idea that sustained itself and that became this novel. Recently, I had a similar thing, which I'll share with you only because maybe it's interesting in terms of revealing process. I have no idea why. I don't know what tipped me off to it. I could not possibly point to an origin. I just became interested in people who do Civil War recreations. Do you
Yeah.
guys know what those are?
Oh, yeah.
And it's like an odd subculture, and they take it so utterly seriously. And I thought, wouldn't it be funny if somebody stumbled into a Civil War recreation, right? Just a civilian, a bystander. And these Civil War recreators were so invested in the project that the only way not to break character, which is the worst thing you could possibly do, would be to pretend that these people were from the future, time travelers from the future, and address them like that. So, is that a good idea? Is it a stupid idea? Is it an idea that has any value? I have absolutely no idea. I know that it kind of tickled me, and I can tell you that I will invest a little bit of time in seeing. It may be that in 11 years we'll sit here again with my book Gettysburg. And in all likelihood, it will roll down the world's toilet.
I would gladly read that novel. So I encourage you to pursue it. So the earthquake I mentioned leads to the outbreak of a war in the Middle East. Some of Israel's neighbors take the chance to invade, but really that provides a backdrop for a novel that's really about a family in crisis. And I don't think it's much of a spoiler to say, the last days of a marriage. I found it interesting that to Julia and to Jacob, even though this historic world event is going on at the same time they are figuring out their future, their marriage is more important than, what has happened in the world. And I've seen some early reviews say, how can you compare the death of tens of thousands of people to the end of a family of 5? But to me, when some of my most personal, intimate events have happened, it seems like it's the most important thing in the world. I mean, do you feel the same way?
Well, I mean, I wonder how many people who make that comment have adopted Syrian refugees. We are all familiar with the experience of being appalled by something, a tragedy, and not responding to it. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't make us unethical people, it just makes us people. And this book is not about, I should say, just a tiny bit of background. It's about a family in Washington, D.C., a couple, Jacob and Julia, who are in their very early 40s. Jacob is a writer of different kinds. Julia is an architect who had ambitions to make sort of museums and memorials, and now does bathroom renovations and kitchen remodels. They have 3 sons, 13, 10, and 6. And then there are 2 older generations as well. So one of the questions in the book is that of scale. What is big and what is small? What matters a lot, even though we have a hard time seeing it, and what doesn't matter that much, even though we obsess over it? And how do our confusions about scale end up ruining us as individuals and in relationships? The book takes place over the course of 4 weeks, during which there's supposed to be the bar mitzvah of their oldest son, which gets sort of thrown into peril when he gets in trouble in Hebrew school for having written a list of racial epithets and just sexual perversions and homophobic, everything bad you can imagine he wrote, and he gets in trouble for that. The Israeli cousins come into town for the bar mitzvah, and Tamir is Jacob's peer. He's also in his early 40s, and is kind of like his twin, his Israeli twin, like an American Jew and an Israeli Jew. And they have a conversation late one night where Jacob sort of expresses envy at the bigness of Tamir's life. Your life is so big over there. It's so heroic and romantic, and here I am in America, choosing paint colors and trying to find a more organic mattress than the one that we already have, and an oven that cooks food in precisely the same way but looks a little better. And Tamir really pushes back against him and says, your problem is that you don't have nearly enough problems. And this question of scale and what is near and what is far, what's immediate, what's distant, what's urgent, what's active, what's passive, what we give ourselves unconditionally to and what we hold ourselves back from is what the different characters in their different ways are wrestling with.
Mm-hmm. I'm already getting the wrap-up signal, so I'm just going to ask 2 more questions, and then we'll leave the rest of the time for audience questions. This is kind of at its core, I think, a novel about happiness and pursuing happiness and facing, kind of admitting one's unhappiness. And there's a scene where Julia is talking to a friend whose marriage is also coming to an end. And she says something that I underlined it when I was reading. She says, while we pursue happiness, we flee from contentment. And I know you can't take credit for that. You took it from somewhere. But I wanted to ask you about that line. Do you think happiness is overrated? Do you think we'd be more happy if we spent less time trying to be happy?
Well, I took it from the Talmud, so I'm very, I didn't just take it from anywhere. I didn't take it from the cartoonist who's appearing here in a couple weeks. I took it from the Talmud, capital T Talmud. So I think most people feel at times like a distance between themselves and the happiness they imagined or the happiness that they feel they once experienced. The title of, if it's not the first chapter, then the second chapter is Get Back to Happiness. And that is sort of Julia's idea. Like it has an unfortunate echo with Trump's Make America Great Again. And then there are other characters who see happiness, like Jacob does, like in the future. Like if I could just do this thing, like if I just moved, or if I just did this thing professionally, if I had an affair, like there's something else I can do, and I just have to cross that distance. The oldest son, spends most of his time in this online world, as if happiness could exist on the other side of a screen, but not in a physical presence. So I think in the book, each character has a distance between, as probably does everybody in this room, at one time or another, a distance between the happiness they feel that they're experiencing and the happiness that they either imagined experiencing or feel that they deserve. So then the question is, do I reel myself toward that idea, or do I try to reel that idea toward myself? Like, do I go out and get a new job? Do I get a convertible? Do I have an affair? Do I, stop being an accountant and start being a sculptor, whatever, so that I can just crawl my way there, then I'll be happy? Or do I find a way to pull my definitions back toward my life and say, I have a lot. I have a friend whose mother got a cancer diagnosis, and my friend was telling me about it. He was in the room with her at the time, and the doctor came in, and it was one of these, like, you have 2 weeks to live situations. And she heard the news, and she said, why me? And everybody was silent. And she said, why am I so lucky? Why have I been so lucky to have this life? Why have all these blessings befallen me and not somebody else? So that's an example of like pulling the definition of happiness close to one's life. There's a scene at the end of the book when Jacob, in a moment of great despair, like sort of after a kind of crumbling of his family, imagines himself banging on a door, a huge metal door, which he describes as the door to his sanctuary, a place of his peace, of his rest, and of his happiness. And banging, it's just too heavy, and he cannot open it, and he cannot get in. And why won't you let me in, let me in, let me in? And he says, I didn't realize that the door opened in and not out, and that I was inside the whole time. And so I think that that's the kind of happiness that's at stake in the book.
Last question, and it relates to something you said when we spoke the other week that struck me at the time, and actually once the piece was published, I saw a couple of other people commenting on it. You said the hardest thing about writing is persisting. How do you continue to persist, and why is it the hardest thing?
Well, it's hard because there's so many incentives to stop. Has anybody tried to write a book in this room? I've been really nobody.
They're lying. There we go.
I have been a teacher for about 10 or 12 years. I've taught, a couple hundred students, and maybe 10 of them are still writing. It's not because the others lack talent. It's because it's very hard it's very hard not to stop. Writing a good sentence is something everybody in this room could do. It's actually not that hard. If you really devoted yourself to it, if that was what you wanted to do with your life, you could write good sentences. If you wanted to write good characters, you could do it. If you wanted to craft a structure that was engaging, you could do it. It's hard, but you could do it. The hardest thing is maintaining that level of care over that period of time. And so, you ask me, how do I do it? I don't do it easily or well. It took me 11 years to do it. I don't have a secret other than to just continually go back into it. But that's the truth. So many of the things that I would say about writing, I would say the exact same thing about like parenting or relationships or anything. It's that everybody knows that feeling of like, I don't want to go back into it, but I have to go back into it, So it's like you can choose to be like in a car or in a plane. Like if you're in a car and you see the dark storm clouds ahead, you just turn around. You say, I'll make the drive tomorrow. It's not that big a deal. Or I'll go to some other place. If you're in a plane, the only way to get to the other side of a storm is to go through it. You just have to go through it. There's no choice. And I often now I don't particularly like to fly, and I comfort myself with that. In turbulence, like, we just have to go through this. There is no choice but to go through it. And that's often what I tell myself when I'm writing. Like, this is extraordinarily unpleasant. I'd say that not as a joke. It's just unpleasant. I feel badly about the project. I feel badly about myself. I have no boss who's like giving me stupid instructions who I can blame. It's not working because of me. Only because of me. And worse, the project that I'm working on is unconstrained. It's not even as if I'm working on like math theorems or, something that has a referent outside of myself. The only thing that I am referring to when I write, even if I'm writing about something that happens halfway around the world or people who are completely unlike me, the only thing I'm ever referring to really ultimately is myself. And I think that is true for every single writer of fiction. So then if it isn't working, if there's something that isn't captivating or good about it, it's because there's something that isn't good about me. And that's just the feeling I have, and it's the feeling that every writer who I know has had to wrestle with. And so you just have to go through it. There's no way around it, as far as I can tell.
Jonathan, thank you. We got the good side, so
Thank you.
appreciate it. So there is a microphone right in the center aisle. So we'll be taking questions, for the next 10 or 15 minutes. So don't be shy, please. Go ahead, thank you.
Oh, hi, good evening. Obviously, haven't read the book. The only thing I really knew was the title. It was interesting to learn about these concepts of distance and things, but the first things I learned with the title and the fact that it has somehow to do with Jewish identity. And I'm just wondering, your title has strong echoes to Hineni, to very dramatic things in the Bible, Abraham's sacrificing of Isaac, the most dramatic prayer in the Yom Kippur liturgy. And so I'm just wondering how or whether your book has any echoes that relate to that corpus.
Did everybody hear what he said? Well, you should really read the book.
I have to wait till it's out in paperback, unfortunately.
Oh my God, come on. That can't possibly be true. Do you have a cell phone? Do you pay a monthly cell phone service fee? Do you get a coffee at Starbucks every now and then? You can buy a book. You have a beautiful hat. Your glasses are nice. I'm just kidding. I bet you we can even get you a free copy somehow.
All right.
Although I regret having said that.
There's 500 people here.
Yeah. I am also a college student. It refers explicitly to that story that you're talking about, the binding of Isaac. So in that story, which is one of the most well-known stories really across cultures, God says to Abraham, Abraham. And Abraham responds, here I am, Hineni. And God says, I need you to sacrifice your son. So in fact, the words are, and then God put Abraham to the test. He said, Abraham. Abraham said, here I am. And then God said, I need you to sacrifice your son. So some people interpret the test actually not as, I need you to sacrifice your son, but rather, how are you going to respond when I call for your name? Are you going to say, what is it? Are you going to say, give me 5, I'll be right there? Or are you going to say, here I am? Unconditionally, without reservations, I don't need to know what you're about to ask me. The answer is yes, in advance. Later in the story, when Abraham's leading Isaac up Mount Moriah, and Isaac begins to catch wind that something weird is going on, because they have all of the supplies for a sacrifice, but no sacrifice. He says, not father, he says, my father. And Abraham responds, here I am, unconditionally, without reservations. So there's a problem, because you cannot be unconditionally present for a God who wants you to kill your son while being unconditionally present for your son who doesn't want to be killed. And it's a paradox of identity, and it's one of the things that makes that story so powerful. And I think that each of us has our own versions of those paradoxes. People who have kids and have professions know what that's like. You think of yourself as being unconditionally present for your child. You think of yourself as being unconditionally present for yourself, for your professional ambitions, but sometimes you miss a soccer game so you can go to a meeting, and sometimes you don't take a promotion so that you can continue to have dinners at home. People feel those paradoxes sometimes between religious values and secular values. Sometimes people feel those paradoxes inside of a marriage, to be devoted to another while also being devoted to a kind of sense of oneself as an individual in the world. And those paradoxes don't cause mass destruction, they don't ruin lives, they don't cause tons of pain usually, and oftentimes they're just sort of invisible and unfelt. Except sometimes a crisis arises that makes it impossible to be here I am and here I am. And you have to actually say, I'm going to locate myself in this one place at an expense. And the book is organized around these two crises. One is this domestic one, the discovery of a cell phone in an affair. The other is an earthquake. So the cell phone precipitates this choice. Are you in this marriage or are you not in this marriage? You cannot both be in it and out of it as you have been for a decade. The earthquake creates this cause of chain of cause and effects, which leads to a war, which leads ultimately to Israel's prime minister making a plea to Jews all around the world between the ages of, 16 and 55, something like that, to come to Israel to fight for its survival. So such Jews are compelled to say, I will go, or I will acknowledge that I am not going to go. I will state that Israel is ultimately dispensable. It's either indispensable or indispensable. Now I have to say which it is for me. So while the situations in the book are extremely particular, I think that the kinds of paradoxes that they break open will be familiar to most readers.
So do you ever get to, drawing on another part of sort of popular Jewish culture, do you ever get to that moment of there is no other hand?
There is no other hand?
Yeah, that's the famous scene in Fiddler on the Roof, where Tevye is always bargaining, trying to somehow negotiate these tensions, these what you call paradoxes, and he physically slaps his hand because he's always doing it, and he realizes in this particular moment there is no other hand. He can only act in it one particular way. He has to make a choice.
I don't actually remember that, despite finding it impossible. I regret that you just brought up Fiddler on the Roof because I had just removed some of the songs from my incessant playlist in my head.
You'll be whistling it for
It was
several days.
years and years of work to get Wonder of Wonders out of my head. I just don't remember that scene, but it sounds sort of resonant.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the interview. It was wonderful to hear both of you this evening. From an Indigenous perspective, storytelling is considered as a sacred trust. When you consider your writing process, do you find yourself encountering sacred moments as you move through text, as you move through the images that you set down?
Through my own
Through your own images, through your own text as you set it down.
So what do you mean by sacred?
That's one of the wonderful things that I'd like you to define for your own text.
You're asking me to both ask the question and supply the answer.
Frequently, I get that, yes.
Okay. Well,
Consider it from the perspective of storytelling as a sacred act. Do you find yourself encountering, setting down something that you have encountered that resonates with you profoundly, deeply, and what that process does or means for you in the act of writing?
here's maybe the best way to answer that. There's a scene in the book, and it's one of these scenes that is like a regret from that sculpture. It has no place in the book. It just serves no function. It's not like a continuation of anything. It's just an appendage. Truly, there's no reason for it to be there. And it's about 4 sentences at most. And Jacob is remembering a trip. It's actually a flash forward. He describes the trip he took with his middle son, Max, to Marfa, Texas, to an observatory. Max had this like budding interest in astronomy. And so Jacob is the kind of dad who like latches onto such a thing and buys him a bunch of astronomy books and gets him a telescope and says, let's make a father-son trip to Marfa. We'll go to the observatory. And they do. And they end up that night on the roof of the Airbnb that they had rented. And they're talking. And all of a sudden Max says, why are we whispering? And Jacob says, I don't know. I didn't even really notice that we were. And Max says, did you ever notice that when people look at the night sky, they often whisper? Why do you think that is? And no further answer is given. That's the end of the little scene. But to me, I think it has to do with a kind of humility in the presence of something larger than you, you know? I have, to use the word regret again, I don't have regret about the first 2 novels that I wrote. I'm proud of them. I'm glad that I did them. I look back and I feel proud. But they were not written with humility exactly. And I feel like this book was in a different way because it was addressing, the sense of scale that we were talking about. I also had to confront my own sense of scale. And the book is a lot bigger than my other books, but I felt smaller myself. The book is a lot louder than my other books. It's filled with arguments. I mean, there's got to be an argument on every page, maybe in every paragraph. And yet I feel like I wrote it with more of like a whisper in that sense of an awareness of not the bigness of the book, that's not the point, but like the bigness of the act of trying to, I'm not like a kid anymore. I feel a little bit more awareness of finitude, and I have kids, and I will not write 1 million books at this rate. I will not write 7 books. But there's a limited amount of energy and resources and time, and that makes one feel small in a good way. And so in that sense, maybe I did feel I'm not a religious person, but maybe that's my version of sacredness.
Thank you. Lovely encounter.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for coming out tonight. I think everyone loved the discussion. At the very beginning of the chat, you said that you hope to have the opportunity to talk about how hyper-culturally niche this book is. As someone who fits within that hyper-cultural niche, reading it, every single line is infused with Jewish flavor. It's sort of like reading Talmud in that, like you said, everything is an argument, everything builds on each other. So in what sense is it not only hyper-culturally niche, but also niche to this moment in time and for this generation? Because I wonder if, Jacob's kids, if their kids, as American diaspora Jews, are going to relate to the story that you're telling in the same way based on how the culture is transforming?
Well, you don't fit into the niche actually, because like part of the specificity that I think about when I think about the book actually has to do with masculinity and like generations of Jewish men. You obviously did not find that to be a problem.
No.
Right?
Nope.
So my hope is that other people who don't fit into aspects of what we're calling the cultural specificity won't find it to be any problem. Not only that, I don't think there's going to be any correspondence at all between the specificity of the book, the specificity of the reader's experience, and their connection to the book. Books just don't work like that. The first radio interview I ever did was in Philadelphia, and the first caller, this was for Everything is Illuminated, got on the line and said, "Oh, I want to thank you for telling my family's life story." I don't know why you're laughing yet. I haven't gotten to the really great punchline. No, thank you for telling my family's story. It's something we've had a hard time. We haven't found words for ourselves. There's a certain amount of shame which feels unnecessary, but you put it into words. And so, of course, I was imagining myself on the other end of the phone. And then the person said, "Being a 65-year-old black man in Trenton, I often..." And I chuckled just like you chuckled. And I looked at the interviewer, and we did one of those like winks without moving your eyelids, you know, but like an understood wink. And then I felt so ashamed. Like, what was I laughing at? Why was that funny at all? What is funny about that? The assumption that like a 65-year-old black guy couldn't possibly have the same story that I have. Obviously, we have different circumstances in our lives. We're different ages, we're different races, different religions. But if that's what books are about, then I'm not that interested in books. James Baldwin once said that he used to think the things he felt most deeply most alienated him from others, because nobody could be happy in the way he was happy, and nobody could be despondent in the way that he was despondent. And then he became a reader, and then he became a writer, and he learned that the things he felt most deeply, most strongly connected him to others, just not the others he was anticipating. So I think there's something to a kind of cultural specificity, which of course can be like familiar and happy to people who share it. Of course, I know what that experience is like. There's no greater joy than watching a movie and seeing your neighborhood in the movie. You ever had that happen? Mm-hmm. Like, I know that's, oh my God, it's so great, hey, we're famous, hey, it's great. Not only we're famous, like we're real. Hey, we're suddenly real. My street exists because it's in a movie. But I think there's another way in which cultural specificity can operate and create a kind of experience for the reader. So if you and I were like astrophysicists and we were carrying on a conversation, if you understood every word that we said, you would know that we were condescending to you. That would have to be the truth, because we would have, in the course of our like becoming astrophysicists, developed a special language, and a language to most efficiently express our expertise. So novelists are experts only of their own imaginations, but we also have developed like languages that hopefully will efficiently express that expertise. Sometimes that language precludes understanding. I guarantee there is at least one thing in this book for everyone in this room where you will say, like, I don't know what that word, what is this thing? Whether it's like something that's particularly Jewish for maybe somebody who wasn't raised in that environment, whether it's like a name brand, you know, for somebody who's never used that name brand, or something that where I refer just to an event in my life, an extremely specific thing. My hope is that in the context of the kind of trust and goodwill that I tried to generate in the book, I want these characters to be familiar. I want you to read it and feel, I recognize that, oh yeah, I've had that, I know that. So that when you hit the moments of inaccessibility, you will know they are only there because they're true. There could be no other reason for it to be there other than its truth. It's not creating a broader audience, it's not charming, it's not like a little nudge and a wink. It's there because it's authentic. And then the thing that you lose in terms of accessibility or understanding you gain in terms of trust and giving yourself over, to that experience. So this book is different from the other books that I've written because there's a lot of that. One of the scenes that I feel happiest about or most proud of is a scene that I would have absolutely detested 5 years ago, reading it, and I never would have written it, which is when Jacob and Julia are preparing for bed one night, and I go into their nightly hygiene rituals. Mm-hmm. Jacob puts Eucerin SPF 30 on his forehead. Julia does this thing where she peels down her lower lid as if she's going to put in a contact lens, even though there isn't a contact lens to put in. Why does she do that every night? Just because she does it every night. Jacob puts on deodorant, even though it's night. Why does he do that? Just because he's Jacob. It's what he does. And I move through a series, and it takes maybe a page or a page and a half, a series of these actions that are described with as much specificity as I could. I really spared no specificity. And at a certain point, it takes on some aspect of nonsense to the reader. It's like, what is this stuff? I don't understand this. But you do understand that it's true, that it's there because that's simply the way it is. My favorite lyrics in songs are the moments when I don't understand the lyrics. It's nice to hear about those sort of universal things about love and longing and all of this, but then when the person has that one little clause that's like, what? The big wheels on 8th Street. What? What the hell does that mean? I have no idea what that means, but I'm absolutely certain that it's true. And when you can give yourself over in that way to believing into the meaning without requiring personal access to it, I think you just achieve a depth that is what art is really about, and the reason people really go to art, either as, or in the case of books, as readers or as writers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
On that note, please join me in thanking Jonathan Safran Foer.
Thank you.